Okay. Greetings from the Arctic. Welcome to the research vessel Sikuliaq. We are in the Arctic Ocean. We're about 100 miles north of the state of Alaska right now. And it's late November, so it's really dark out, even though it is the middle of the day. I am right now inside the wet lab, and I'm going to give you a tour around the ship. So my name is Jim Thomson. I am an oceanographer. I work at the University of Washington, and I'm on the research vessel Sikuliaq with a whole big team of researchers. We're doing a lot of different things up here, trying to understand what happens when the light leaves the Arctic in the winter and everything freezes over. We're doing this as a live stream, so you should be able to see see video and hear audio. We can't see or hear you, but there is a chat active, and Becca's going to moderate the chat. And please engage and add questions to the chat, and then Becca will try to pick out a few of them, and as we go, interject questions, and we'll try to address as much as we can as we go. So to start here, we're in this lab. It's called the wet lab. So this is one of the first labs as you enter the ship coming out from on deck. And there's a group on board that has been studying the polar cod, or Arctic cod, which are a very small fish that live underneath the ice. And they've been doing a lot of their processing in here. They've been really busy the last few days sampling a lot of these cod. And in here they come and they make measurements, and they start to do dissections and lots of different things in here. So this place was really active for the last maybe 72 hours or so, and active around the clock. The ship is always doing something. There's definitely operations happening 24 hours a day. It's really a very unique opportunity to be up here and do this research, so we try to maximize every single minute of it. The other aspects of what we're doing up here are a bit more about the physics of the ice and the ocean and the atmosphere, trying to understand how freezing happens, trying to understand what happens close to the coast. And that's a big part of the project we're doing right now, is understanding how the ice forms near the coast, and when that ice forms, what it means for the coastal dynamics, what it means for the processes of erosion, and how the coast may be protected by the sea ice in the winter and unprotected in the open water season of the summer. So the big thing that we're in the middle of right now is the seasonal cycle. The ice going away and melting in the summer, and in recent summers melting a lot and really going away. Big, vast expanses of open water in the Arctic that did not used to be there even 10 years ago. But that's just in the summer when there's light up in the Arctic. And now the light is gone, and it's getting very cold, and everything's freezing. And we're here to study how the ice returns for the winter. It's about 10 degrees Fahrenheit right now outside, so and it's pretty cold outside. So we'll take you outside in a minute. We'll have everybody will need to get dressed a little bit for that, and we'll show you what it's looking like out there. But for right now, let's just go into the next space going out, which we call the Baltic Room, which is sort of, I think of it as like the mud room of the ship, when you're halfway indoors, halfway outdoors, and all the messy stuff happens before you come the rest of the way in. So let's go out there, and I'll show you a couple things that are going on out there. But I'm going to make sure I grab my jacket before we go out, because we're about to get into some cold areas. So I definitely am going to want this in a few minutes. And also, this jacket has built-in flotation, so it's like a life jacket, and I always need that when I'm out on deck with me. So I grab that right now. So the first thing we see out here is called a CTD and a rosette, or a carousel. And this we use to sample and measure everything that's happening in the water, and we do that as a function of depth. So we measure the temperature, which of course is important for whether something's freezing or not. We measure the salinity, which changes a lot when the ice is forming or melting. And then we measure the depth, so we know how that all varies in depth. And we also collect water. So Jared from the University of Alaska is going to tell us a bit more about what he's been doing with this instrument.
You bet. Thank you, Jim. Good to meet all you guys. I'm a PhD student at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, based out of the Juneau campus. I'm here with the Go West group, working on the Arctic cod story here. So I have been designated the lead oceanographer for the Go West group on this particular cruise. And this is the instrument that I work with every day. It's called the CTD Carousel, as Jim said. This is a tool that's in every oceanographer's toolkit. It does two things for us. So by the acronym CTD stands for conductivity, which is another variant to measure salinity, temperature, and then depth. So when we send it down in the water, we can get all of those variables at one time and pinpoint differences in the water masses or differences in the water column through the electronic cable that feeds back into the ship. And then as you can see, we have huge bottles here. We got 24 huge bottles. They're called Nitskin bottles, and these are electronically activated. So as we go down and come up in the water column, we can trap individual sections of water and bring them back up to the boat to sample. And here, if Jim holds the microphone again, I'll show you kind of how that action works. So when it's electronically triggered, these are all already cocked open, just like this, if you see it right there. So when it is electronically triggered, these all slam shut. Here comes the water that we collected this morning. So that released the water that we had this morning, and then that loud noise is what happens underwater. So every part of this water column that comes up, then we take it back into the laboratory, collect it in bottles, use syringes to filter it directly. But we're really looking for the chemical signatures and the biological signatures that are present in each of these water column little sections. So it really gives us an idea of the environment in which some of these Arctic cod and other critters are living in. So it's really a fantastic instrument, very technologically advanced. And the ship really helps us with that. It's lowered through this big boom system up here, and through this large Yeti-style door. It's very big, so the boom takes it all out, and we lower it down in the water column, bring it right back up. This is generally the first thing we do at every station. This is a very important event, generally kicks off everything else. And then we spend hours and hours filtering all these water samples, and then we go help on the deck afterwards. So that's about it. I'll hand you back over to Jim here.
All right, thanks a lot, Jared. Yeah, so you can see when all that water went out, right, that's why we do this in the Baltic Room. The Baltic Room has drains and scuppers, and so all the water can drain back out. And this is a perfect space for this, and this is kind of unique to an Arctic research vessel because everything wants to freeze all the time while we're up here, and so we have to be constantly taking our instruments, in and out of these freezing environment and being able to work with them. So the Baltic Room is the thing that lets us do that. It lets us, bring this in and get it all de-iced and work with it, and then put it right back out there in the freezing environment. So as I come a little further this way, the other thing that's staged in the Baltic Room right now are these buoys, and these are the buoys that we brought. We call them swift buoys, and they measure waves and a lot of other things, temperature, salinity, winds in the ocean. And so these are all staged and ready for a big event that we're trying to capture over the next few days. The forecast is showing a big storm coming through. It's going to be 40-knot winds and 15, 16-foot seas and a lot of heavy freezing spray. And these are the conditions that we're here to study. We want to understand when a storm comes through like this, is it really able to hit the coast and impact the coast and erode the coast? Or does the ice form so quickly that it protects the coast? So that's what we're about to go do. We're gearing up for it now, testing everything. And it's going to be tough. We're expecting it to be difficult because the freezing conditions are going to be so severe that a lot of these buoys will probably get completely encased in ice. And at that point, this antenna, which tells us where it is and sends the wave data back, that antenna is not going to work very well anymore once it's encased in 8 or 10 inches of ice. So we're going to have a lot of chasing these things and managing these things and trying to keep them running throughout that storm event. But we're as ready for it as we can be. So we'll start that probably in about 12 hours. So while that's happening at the surface, there's also a lot happening beneath the surface. And beneath the surface is where the seabed is getting reworked and sediment's getting picked up and moved around. And so we have an expert on board who's studying that. Emily Idem is from the University of North Carolina, and she's got some tools to show us that study that process. So here's Emily.
Thanks, Jim. As Jim said, I'm from the University of North Carolina Department of Marine Sciences, and I'm a marine geologist, so I'm interested in all of the sedimentary processes happening here in the Arctic. And we're kind of excited to be studying this area right now because we know that coastal shorelines in Alaska are experiencing really rapid retreat, and we're seeing that retreat accelerate. And what that means is that there's an increasing source of sediment going into the ocean. And in these Arctic environments, because they're difficult to study, we actually don't have a great idea of where all that material goes. And in other environments, we often go collect cores of the seabed to try to figure out a history and a time series of sediment delivery to the bed. In the Arctic, that's actually really challenging to do because ice forces during the winter rework the seabed, and you end up with a lot of coarse sediments and substrates that are really difficult to core. So One of our best options for trying to figure out where sediment goes is to actually get out there during events and look at sediment in the water column and see the waves and currents acting on it and try to measure where it's going while it's actually in transport. So one of the major tools that we use to look at that is this package that includes a much smaller version of the CTD rosette system that Jared just showed you. So we have a very small CTD. We even have a miniature Niskin bottle to get water samples for calibration. And this sensor also includes what we call an optical backscatter sensor. And that's a very small light-emitting diode that actually lets us look at the concentration of particulate matter in the water column. And then we also have a fluorometer on there to measure chlorophyll to tease out any biologic signal of particulates. In addition to that, we also have a laser transmissometer, which is basically just a laser beam that we shoot through the water column to try to look at the range of particle sizes in suspension. And when we put all that together with information about the waves and currents, we can actually track particle motion in the water column. So that's great to allow us to see where sediment's going. We're also interested in seeing how the seabed evolves. So we have all this fresh material coming in, and that's changing what we see on the bed, so that's changing habitats for organisms. It's actually changing the friction that waves feel on the bed, so we really want to get out and measure how that evolves. And to do that, since coring can be difficult in these environments, we use a device called a Shipback grab sampler. So this is a really great bulk sampling tool. It doesn't give us a profile of sediment, it just gives us a look at what's on the surface, but that's really valuable for showing us how the surface evolves in these events. So one of our wonderful marine techs, Paul, is going to help me set this up, and we'll show you how it works. This is basically like a spring-loaded bear trap. So we have a sampling bucket that we have to put into this. Flip it over. So we load the bucket in, and then we engage it, and then we get to hoist it up and arm it. So we're basically going to arm a giant spring that's going to retract that and hold it shut. And then there's a dynamic weight on top, and when this hits the seabed, that weight slides down and it trips the sensor. So it's basically just a spring-loaded shovel to give us a sample of the surface of the seabed. And the great thing about using a tool like this is that it has enough force that it can actually dig through sand and gravel, so we can sample even the coarse sediments that we expect to see out here during really large wave events. All right, that looks good. So now we'll set this giant spring, and that'll arm it. Back to you. All right. Ready? Okay. And that's how a shipback samples the seabed. That's always a fun demo to do. So when this comes back, we'll recover a bulk sample, and then we'll take that back to our lab. We'll put it in a laser particle sizer to get the range of sizes on the bed. And then if we get muddier sediments, we'll also do isotope analyses on those to try to get a signal of how much material has been freshly delivered from the shore. And with that, I'll hand it back to Jim.
All right. Okay, so now we're going to go outside, and we'll get to see some sea ice and see what's happening out on deck and go back to some biology. But first, it looks like there's a question coming in, so let's take a question first.
Yeah, Christy from Virginia is wondering about a little bit more detail about what data you are actually collecting to measure the ice and waves. What are the actual elements that you're collecting?
Got it. So the question is about what's the actual data we're collecting about the ice and the waves. So for the waves, we measure the height of the waves, so just how tall they are, and then the period of the waves, which is what the spacing is between the different waves. And we actually make a more detailed measurement that goes across a whole spectrum of the waves, because the ocean waves are not just as simple as, you know, every wave is not the same as they come through. So we have this way of characterizing them as a full spectrum of the waves. So we measure that, and then we look at how that spectrum changes in the presence of the sea ice. The sea ice, we measure its temperature, its surface temperature, and generally the colder ice is a stronger ice, and then we measure its thickness. The thickness we measure by taking grab samples. We literally dip a net over the side of the ship and take samples of the ice as it breaks off as we go through the ice. Or if it's safe to do so, we get out on the ice and we use drills to drill holes in the ice, get the thickness, and we can get cores out of the ice too. And then the cores we can do some more analysis on, and we can see, the biologists can see what's living in the ice, and there definitely are things living in the ice. And we can also look at the ice in sections and look at its mechanical properties. So those are the key things we're measuring. Okay, one more question coming in.
Yeah, Laura Lee from Virginia would like to see if you've seen any multi-year ice.
Another question from Virginia, a very good question from Virginia. Have we seen any multi-year ice? So let me first explain what that means. Multi-year ice is ice that survives the summer. So the general seasonal cycle that I already described is that the ice all melts in the summer and then it comes back in the winter. But historically it doesn't all melt. There's quite a bit of ice that makes it through the Arctic summer, because the Arctic summer is really not that warm and there's really not that much light. The light's at a very low angle. So what we had seen, for decades was that a lot of ice would make it through the summer, and then it would continue to grow even more in the next year. And then we began to call it multi-year ice, and that's the ice that gets thick and strong, and once it's survived many years, it grows a little more every year and a little more every year. So it becomes very substantial ice, the kind of thing that's hard for an icebreaker to go through, the kind of thing that you can definitely get out and walk on and is really substantial ice. There's not much of that ice left in the Arctic. That's one of the big changes we're seeing. I think when people look at maps of the Arctic sea ice, they notice that there's a lot less of it. But from our perspective, what's really remarkable is that the quality of the ice that is left is also very different. It's really not the same ice. We call it first-year ice. It grew just that winter, and then it's all gone again the next summer. So it never has a chance to get to maturity. It never gets to be very thick. It gets to be maybe a meter instead of 4 or 5 meters. And it never gets that same really detailed structure, and mechanically it doesn't have the same properties either. So we have not seen a single piece of multi-year ice on this whole trip, and we're 3 weeks into a month-long trip. It's all been new ice. There's just not much multi-year ice left in the Western Arctic anymore. Okay, our connection may be a little fuzzy, if we start to lose video, you may keep the audio. So we're going to keep it rolling and see what we can get. I'd like to take you out on deck and show you a little bit of what the ice looks like out around us. And then I'd also like to introduce you to another scientist and another graduate student and show you what they have been up to with the polar cod sampling they've been doing. So I got to button up a little bit though. Even for a few minutes out there, it's quite cold. So. Okay, let's come on out of the Baltic Room onto the aft starboard deck. Okay, so we're just starting to make it into some open water now. You can see little pieces of ice around, and this is some of the most open water that we've been in. We're starting this transit to the area by the coast that we're expecting this big storm to hit. And so, but you can see some ice off in the distance there, and you can see how the waves are moving the ice around a little bit, and that's exactly what we're here to study. This is a very mild case. 12 hours from now, we should be in waves that are a lot bigger and, coming up and getting close to the rail here. And so we'll be quite a bit more concerned about, personnel's safety out here when we get to that point and that stage. So come on back a little further, and you can see there's a lot of heavy equipment out here on deck that we use to move things around. We've got 2 big cranes, one starboard, one port, and then a big, what we call the A-frame at the back, and that's used for lifting things off the deck. So, and then this big thing back here in the middle of the deck, I'll let Mai explain. So this is Mai. She is a graduate student here from Germany, and she'll tell you a bit about the fishing they've been doing and the samples of polar cod.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Mai. I'm a student from Germany, and I'm also on the Go West team. And we're a team of different nationalities all working with this one net, which is called the SUIT net. SUIT stands for Surface and Under Ice Trawl. And what we are interested in is the habitat under the sea ice. So maybe we can go a little closer. How close can I go? Yeah? Okay, so what you can see here is a pretty much naked suit. This is just a frame made out of steel. And it might be a little confusing to see it like this, but actually this is the top. So the tires are here to make it float on the water surface. And so you have to rotate it 90 degrees, 45 degrees, 90 degrees. And at the end, usually there are 2 nets attached, and we catch zooplankton and fish with this net. Like Jim already mentioned, usually polar cod. And this net is towed right behind the vessel, and we can sample directly under the sea ice all the animals that are living there. So why are we interested in sea ice at all? I mean, what's in there? It's actually quite an interesting habitat because sea ice can serve as a structure for ice algae or phytoplankton to live in, and then we have zooplankton that feeds off of the ice algae and fish that feed off of the zooplankton, and of course all bigger marine mammals like seals, whales, etc. feed off of fish. So actually the sea ice is a very important part in the Arctic food chain, and we're very interested to see how this ecosystem works because of course in the course of climate change the available amount of under ice habitat will decrease, and we would like to find out what that's going to do to our Arctic ecosystems. So maybe just for scale I can go inside the suit net. It's pretty big. And yeah, what else can I talk about? We're here with a team of around 10 people, 3 or 4 from Germany like me, but we also have people from the Netherlands, from Belgium, from Russia, and from the University of Fairbanks in Alaska. And it's really interesting to come together and work on this topic together. And what we will do with the samples is, for example, count how many animals are in the nets. We will take the fish and dissect them so we can use their inner organs for later analysis, like genetic analysis. We can see what the fish fed on. We want to measure the respiration, like how much energy are the zooplankton using up. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay. All right. Well, why don't we head back into the Baltic Room and we can take more questions from the chat and yeah, and we can warm up. So it looks like I beat them back into the Baltic Room. Yeah, we are definitely leaving the main part of the forming ice pack right now as we head down towards the coast. And basically what we've been doing is following the ice, as the ice in this part of the coast tends to form first on the eastern side and then wrap its way around the north slope of Alaska. And so we're headed down to a more western region that is icing up a little bit later, a little bit slower. That's the part that's really active right now. The other parts have sort of closed down for the winter and it's all ice.
We have a question about the depth here. What kind of depths have we been seeing from the surface to the sea?
So we got a question about depth. We have been out in this, the Beaufort Basin, which is quite deep. It's 3,000 meters deep, so 3 kilometers deep, and it takes a long time to sample something that deep. Hey, Ethan, come back over this way. So there's there's about 3,000 meters of water in the main part of the Beaufort, but then as we get close to the coast, it gets really shallow. It's a very steep continental slope, and then the continental shelf is about 50 meters deep all the way into the shore, which is, zero. So a lot of the coastal work that we've been doing, that Emily and I have been doing, has been focused in those shallower waters, so in feet from 0 to 200 feet. But then the team that's been doing the fishing and the biology, they've been focused a little bit further out and really at the shelf break and all the way into the basin, seeing where things are happening. So we're kind of covering all depths, really.
I have a question for Jared from Eastern Oregon.
You bet.
Do you have to disinfect between sampling sites with CTD?
We don't usually, is this on? We don't usually disinfect like you're generally thinking, like alcohol or anything like that. The CTD itself pretty much gets washed on the way down, so any samples that we take and trap, they're pretty much generally clean samples. But when we get back into the laboratory, that's when we really kick in. So a lot of our filters go down to just tiny, tiny microns. So all of those samples are filtered down to get the various chemical and biological properties of the water. And then we actually use that filtrate to wash our equipment thereafter because it's so finely filtered. So there are a few things that we do use ethanol for, genetic samples for example, but for the most part we use our own filtrate that we produce from our oceanography samples. Great question.
I have a question from John. How many cod did you expect to catch, and how many have you actually got?
It's hard to say before how many cod we will catch because we have not fished with this net in this area before. So our expectations were pretty much open. But actually we had great news because we set a record of fishing the most fish we've ever fished 2 times. So I think in the Arctic Sea close to Norway, we caught around 26. That was our max. And then here we caught 38. So that was a really good news for us.
Can you show us how big they are with your hands? How big are you?
It depends how they can get a few years old. So the ones that we catch are mostly like this, which is like a few months to up to a year old, and I think they can get around 40 centimeters. So pretty big. But we're just interested in the younger ones because these are the ones that live under the ice. The bigger ones retreat into deeper waters.
A question for each of you in turn. What is your favorite part? What is the best part about being up here on the Sikuliaq in the Arctic?
Great. I just really love getting to see this environment during the time of year when it's all freezing up and changing because it's really different from most of the temperate latitudes where we work. The sea ice is just so unique and it takes a whole variety of forms, and it's just fun to see it in the moment as it's freezing and to be measuring the water properties and the seabed properties at the same time.
I particularly like walking on the ice. It's almost like walking on a desert platform. The horizon just goes all the way, but it's all ice, and you realize that you're standing on 3,000 meters of water. It's just really empowering, and then you core into it, and you're just staring down at the bottom of the ocean through a hole that's about 4 centimeters wide. So it's pretty cool walking on the sea ice.
I think I like trying to figure out how to make these measurements. Some of the things we're trying to measure just haven't been measured before, or at least not in these harsh storm conditions, and so I like the puzzle of trying to figure that out, and we don't always get it right. You know, we are constantly iterating and refining and learning and figuring out, okay, that didn't work so well that time, let's try it differently this time, we need new tools to do it, and then we go back to the lab and we develop new tools. So, the approach that we're going to try in the storm we're about to go into is something we've been working our way towards for maybe the last 10 years or so, but we're not done. I think we're going to get a great data set, but there's always more to be done. So I like the iteration and trying to figure out how can we do it better the next time. I like that process.
You all said very good replies that I've also liked to say, but it's my very first time in the Arctic, so I'm overwhelmed by pretty much everything here. But from a work perspective, I would say that it's really cool to, for the first time, do practical work with the suit, because I've already analyzed suit samples for my bachelor's thesis, and now to see it in real life for the first time and to realize how big it is and how hard it is to actually get those samples that I've been working on for months was really interesting for me.
A question for Jim. This actually came in on our last live stream. We didn't get to it. Can you talk about where the funding comes from for a trip like that?
I probably should have started with that, actually. Different sources. The project that originally funded this cruise, and then other things have been added onto this research expedition, was from the National Science Foundation. So that's my portion, and maybe I'll go down the line, because others have different funding sources, right?
So I'll just speak to the EROS Group. It's the international consortium that my boss, Dr. Franz Mutter, got his funding through, and it's mostly a consortium of scientists getting together and using the fleet of icebreakers around the Arctic to collaborate and go out together and really use those in a beneficial way, both in the spring and fall time, and to really get all the scientists out there together at one time and really look at their methods and their results and analyze together.
And I'm also funded through the National Science Foundation Office of Polar Programs on a different project beyond Jim's, and that gives us a lot of flexibility for collaborating with folks like Jim and really leveraging this ship time to its maximum capacity to get out here and get as many measurements as we can to extend our data sets.
Yeah, I'm on the same team as Jared.
I will say that Boehm did supply a little money, and they're always in support of research up here, in support of coastal studies. So Bureau of Ocean Energy Management should definitely be mentioned.
And I should also mention the Office of Naval Research. We're doing a lot of work up here to try to improve forecasting, and that's a big effort from the Navy right now, is trying to improve the forecasting in the Arctic. And so we are receiving and evaluating custom experimental forecasts from them as we speak, and the storm we're headed into, they're going to be very interested to see how well they forecast that and then how to improve that forecast going forward. So I think what you're seeing is that to get this many people on board a big Arctic research vessel and be doing this much work up here, it takes gluing together lots of different things, and that's good. That's how we maximize this resource and maximize our productivity when we're up here.
Question for Emily. What would be the perfect wave event to generate ideal sediment data for your research?
Oh, I don't know. I think this wave event coming up looks pretty perfect. I guess if we had slightly bigger waves, that might lead to an even bigger signal. But we're looking at, what, a couple meter high waves? Yeah, so that's a lot of energy to really pick up any material that's been recently eroded from the coast and start moving it down the shelf. So we're excited to get started.
I'm going to ask you 48 hours from now if you really want bigger waves. We'll have this discussion again.
Sounds good.
What do you anticipate it's going to be like this week? Tell us about the conditions on board.
I think on board, it's a big ship and it should handle the conditions fine. I am mostly concerned about the buoys just having so much freezing spray that they ice up so much that we lose our ability to track them or to recover the data from them. They send their data back via satellite. It goes to a server in Seattle, and then we can get it back here with our satellite connection, or eventually we recover the buoys and all the data is stored on board just on a card, the same way your digital camera would have the data. So getting that raw data back is very important to us. So I think that's a key concern. And then the other concern is just to be able to make sure we operate safely the whole time. The storm should take 4 days by the time it really goes all the way through, and we're going to be working in shifts, or we have watches established, but just to make sure that people don't get exhausted and start making mistakes on deck and falling down on an icy deck and getting injured or something like that. I think that's definitely always, safety is always the first concern.
Okay, last one. Where can the live streamers learn more if they want to follow along with us?
They should go to iceinmotion.com, and that will direct you to lots of other places. You can get more technical information from the different university websites and go from there.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.